Welcome to Interchange, a conversation about music and liturgy and all the in-between spaces on the journey. I'm your host, Kate Williams. Today, I am honored to be joined by actually someone who's on the back end of this podcast production, David Dault. And I've pulled up here his bio from Loyola University, where it says that David Dault spends his time with one foot in the academy and one foot in the world of television, radio, and podcasting. So at Loyola, he's overseeing the programs for Christian spirituality and spiritual direction. And beyond Loyola, he is also an award-winning screenwriter, media producer, consultant, and radio host. And believe it or not, I first met him on a different podcast, because you have really, how many feet do you have? You have a ton of feet in all kinds of podcasts in the podcasting world, one of which we're honored to say is our little corner of podcast universe. Welcome, David.
Kate, I'm so glad to be with you, and thank you for taking the time. And it's a really disorienting in the best possible way to step from behind the scenes to be on the microphone with you, and I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to do this too. You are such an interesting character. First, thank you also, right back at you. It's such I was saying before we began officially recording that it's such a happy accident that the time should fall for us to have this conversation on the podcast now, in light of all the things happening in the world. But this is going to seem disconnected at first, how many podcasts are you involved in?
A lot. So I produce several where I am either the host or the co-host. So I do the radio show and podcast, Things Not Seen. I work in a dialogue podcast with my friends Dan Horan and Heidi Schlumpf on a program called The Francis Effect, where we talk about current events through a lens of Catholic faith. I do a podcast with a political scientist, political theorist friend of mine, Steve Millies, where we read every one of the Federalist Papers together and talk about it, each one for an hour, and it's called Stephen and David Read the Federalist Papers. With a friend of mine from over in Indiana, I work on both an intermittent podcast about Mr. Rogers and an intermittent podcast about Superman and the spirituality of Superman. And then behind the scenes, I work on GIA's Intercambio and Interchange podcasts. I help to produce the Commonweal Magazine podcast. I also work with the Paulist fathers and brothers to help them produce their podcast. And then there are, here and there some other projects that I've worked on over the years and things that come and go. And so it keeps me busy when I'm not teaching and being a parent.
And how did you figure out the science behind cloning yourself or multiplying the hours in the day somehow? I don't understand how you're doing all of this work.
Well, I have a very supportive family, and we have all discovered that if I can get things into a regular schedule, they are all manageable. And my wife has insisted that I have to get a good night's sleep each night. And so I am not cloned. There's no magic here. It's just good scheduling. And I am blessed that I am now at the point where all of the clients that I work with and all of the shows that I work on, we've been doing it all for so many years now that I'm very good with the sort of behind the scenes routines. There's not a lot of things that I have to improvise. I kind of know what to do as soon as I get the pieces and how to stitch them together. So if this was, 15 years ago when I got started, it would not be possible to do all the things that I do. But there is something to be said for experience and for having made all of the mistakes already. And so that's kind of, I benefit from that at this point.
Yeah. And on top of that, you're also a musician, right? So you've had a unique, I think, when we get feedback from you about the episodes that we're producing for Interchange and Intercambio, you're coming from an awareness standpoint of also being a musician, right?
Yes, although I do not read music and I am not classically trained. My wife was classically trained in music, but I was a touring singer-songwriter for about a decade down in the Southern Circuit. If you're familiar with a group from the 1980s called the Indigo Girls, I was part of the scene that was sort of around them and played in similar places and have grilled hot dogs next to them, or in Amy Ray's case, it would be a tofu dog. But anyway, I've been in that orbit and, I know what it's like to take a piece of music from an idea in your head or a little A Twinkle in Your Eye into performing it in front of sometimes thousands of people. But that's a long time ago now that I was actively involved in that. I still play music for fun, but I no longer perform it publicly the way that I used to.
Oh my God. There's so much I did not know about you, David. Also, like the little ways that the Venn diagram is connecting, friend of the podcast, Don Salyers, who is the father of Emily
The very
Salyers, the
first
integrated.
time that I met Emily Salyers, Don's daughter, I had this wonderful moment where I was in seminary at the time at Columbia Theological Seminary. And even though I knew how famous she was, it was a little fun moment where I suddenly looked at her and was just totally starry-eyed. And I said, wow, you're Don Salyers' daughter. And had a chance to sort of geek out about that. And I think she enjoyed that. I don't know that she would remember that now, 30 years on, but that was a fun moment.
Amazing. And now, of course, the Indigo Girls are having like a whole new wave of being seen by the culture because of the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
That Closer to Fine song. It's like even like the kids are hip to the Indigo Girls now, right?
Yep. And I had the good fortune of being friends of theirs. And so some of their cohort were really close with me. And my friend Gerard McHugh, who was a songwriter and performer in his own right, he told me the story one time of sitting at the parking lot just down on the gravel at a place called Trackside Tavern, which was on the east side of Atlanta. And he was there playing with the Indigo Girls, and they were like, well, we got a new song that we're going to play tonight, and we want you to hear it. And they played Closer to Fine. It's like he had a chance to hear it before anybody else did. And so, yeah, it's fun to be sort of adjacent to fame, but having never been famous, that's a very comfortable place for me. I'm actually really glad that I never got kind of some of the attention that they got. I think it would have driven me nuts.
Yeah. I don't know how people do it being such a public figure and receiving. I mean, surely there are millions of people who've fallen in love with the Indigo Girls and their music and, who they are as people, what they stand for as people.
Yeah. And I just want to quickly say, having been adjacent to them and having been adjacent to other people in the rock and roll scene and in the acoustic rock scene, what they stood for was a kind of really wonderful thing, because when they got famous, they turned around and they put their resources back into the community, and they really gave back. There are some other people that came through the Atlanta scene that I have played with and that I sort of know and that I could name, but I will not, who treated the scene very instrumentally, and they used it as a stepping stone instead of a home. But the Indigo Girls really treated it as a home, and they treated even the people who were sort of on the edges like me. They gave us places to play and supported us in ways that were really palpable. And I really like to name that, because coming out of that and watching that and seeing how it is when you do have access to fame and resources, how you can still be a decent person, that made a really important impression on me back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need all the examples of that, especially because as, being a public figure, we're such a small little corner of the world. And so even the times when maybe you and I feel like we're being a little bit more public than usual, we're no stranger to the type of, ways people feel comfortable challenging the things that we might have to say.
Yeah.
And it's really overwhelming. But I think like the Indigo Girls are a great pivot into a conversation to learn more about you too, because this might feel like I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I'm just wondering where music and your faith intersect a little bit in your life.
Well, that's a really wonderful question, and I have a couple of layers of answers. And let me say, first of all, for those that don't know me or haven't heard me speak about this in other contexts, I should quickly say I was not raised in a faith tradition.
Okay.
I was raised as an atheist, a pretty militant atheist in terms of my mother's perspective. I later came to find out that my father had some faith, but he didn't talk about it when I was in the house with him, and then my parents divorced when I was relatively young. And so I really came to faith in part through a song.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I went to a college in the middle of Tennessee called Sewanee, the University of the South, and it's an Episcopalian school. And so right in the middle of the school, there is a big church. It's called All Saints Chapel. It's connected to the university. Coming out of high school, I'd done show choir and I had been involved in singing a lot. And when you went to Swanee, it was a very remote campus. And so there was a kind of community choir that was really bad. And then there was the university choir that was really good. But the university choir sang every morning on Sunday in the chapel services. And so I was, a freshman in college, up on Sunday mornings, oftentimes hungover, and the sunlight is streaming through the stained glass windows. And we're sort of rounding the corner out of the Christmas season, and we're coming towards the Easter season, and we start singing this one particular hymn from the Episcopal hymn book, hymn number 458. And the first lines are, "My song is love unknown, my Savior's love to me, love to the loveless shown that they might lovely be. Oh, who am I that for my sake my Lord should take frail flesh and die?" And I find myself, 18 years old, becoming 19 years old in the choir stall, in my robe, sometimes not feeling so well, but having this experience of singing these words and weeping, and I don't know why. And something is starting to work on my soul in the midst of that. And I still come back to that line from that first stanza, "Love to the loveless shown that they might lovely be." And a lot of how I understand my faith is, at the time I was the loveless and I was shown a love that I didn't understand. And it is my task now as a follower of this crazy Messiah that showed me that love, to show love to the loveless that I encounter, those that have been told that
Mm.
they don't belong, those that have been told that they're not worthy. And I mean, I had grown up in the deep South on what I like to call the rust of the buckle of the Bible Belt. And so a lot of times my experience with Christians was them basically finding out that I was an atheist and telling me in no uncertain terms that I was not in their club and I was going to hell. I was going to
Mhm.
suffer immediately and I was going to suffer in all eternity. And then suddenly here, my freshman year of college, through that experience and through another experience with a friend of mine by the name of Julia, who was the first person to ever open a Bible in my presence and not try and swat me with it, I began to realize a different narrative of this God and a different narrative of Jesus than I had ever encountered. And that really made a profound impact on me. So I do think a lot that I was, in many ways, brought to faith through that hymn. It's
Mm.
very Methodist of me, I guess. But let me also say one other thing, and that is, I came from a very impoverished background, and it was a very harsh background. And so for a lot of years, I couldn't afford therapy. And a lot of what my songwriting was for me was a way of sort of working out the demons that were inside of me. It was much cheaper than trying to afford therapy for a long
Mm.
time. And so,
Mm.
that's a long answer to your question. Music factors into my faith in one, because it kept me sane and stable at a
Yeah.
time when I didn't have access to other things, but also this wonderful narrative. And we were talking about the Indigo Girls. I come back oftentimes to an early song of theirs called The Prince of Darkness. And, for those that don't know that song or are unfamiliar with it, I encourage you to take some time with it, because, it is really a song about grace, and it is a song about turning away from the darkness and turning away from the temptation to pay back what you have been given in violence and to choose a better path. And so a lot of my understanding of my faith comes from songs like Prince of Darkness by the Indigo Girls or Fearless Love by David Wilcox and things like that.
There's so much in there. I hope we get a chance to unpack just a lot of what you said in the last couple minutes here. But one of the things is that I totally resonate with music being a part of that therapeutic process in my life.
Yeah.
I'm realizing now I've been going to therapy for like 20 years. And I I'm grateful for it for sure. And I'm also really curious about, I don't want to like explain away miracle. Like I'm not trying to do that, but I'm just very curious about like the physiological reasons why music has such an effect on us. And all I can say is what I've noticed. I'm not a scientist, but I have noticed that probably something I took for granted when I was a music director was how much the frequency of singing and singing with other people in particular was bolstering my own body's resilience.
Mm.
And I didn't notice it until, believe it or not, even though my life is surrounded by music now, being in an editorial seat doesn't necessarily mean a lot of music making. So when I made the transition from being music director to being an editor, there was noticeably less singing and less communal singing happening in my life. A lot of things combined at the same time. I was also like pregnant and then had a baby, but I noticed a significant change in my mental health, my mental stability when I stopped being in that singing environment all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And since I like made that association, I've tried to like as much as I can reincorporate communal singing in my life for my own health. It's about my own health. There is something like beyond what I'm able to name, beyond language. Something is happening in my body and our bodies when we're making music together through the resonance, through the way that we can, sync up our heartbeats and all that stuff that science has proven together with us. There's something deeply theological in that truth too, that needing of each other, that needing to be around one another, needing to hear and be heard, being able to feel supported. I was just recalling this story this morning with some of my team that I remember after my daughter was born, I was really struggling with breastfeeding and I had to hire a lactation consultant. And of course, I told myself all of the things we tell ourselves when our bodies are not behaving, about like, I'm doing something wrong, or I did something to deserve this, or there's something wrong with me. And the lactation consultant was just so wonderfully gentle with me, but she said something that I'll never forget, which is, we were never meant to do this alone. And she recounted for me, examples in, our evolution as a species, women sitting in a nursing circle together, essentially. And so the people who came to this job for the first time could say, oh no, something's wrong, I'm not doing it right. And the person next to you would say, no, that's right. It's supposed to hurt at first. It's, you're supposed to work to build it up. You're supposed, just that reassurance of being in the company of other people who can offer their insights, their support, their reassurance is the thing that our bodies need to do the things that our bodies can do, can heal, can resist, can provide, like a resilience, a bouncing back into comfortability with life and all around us. It's remarkable how much we need each other. And that simple action of making music together, singing together, can do a lot of that work that we can't yet find words to explain. We just know that it's real. It happens because we've experienced it. There's some kind of miracle in there. Just like I hear what you're describing, like when you're singing this song, like there's all kinds of things happening, some of which you can explain, and some you just can't. You just marvel at. Like that is the definition of beauty. You experience and find this thing so worthy of your contemplation that it just captures you. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for trusting me and also trusting your listeners with that little aspect of your journey. I feel honored to have heard that moment of vulnerability that you experienced. And
thank you.
I really think that you're naming something important here. Unless you're a Tuvan throat singer, it is impossible to harmonize with yourself.
Yeah.
And when you're in that moment and you're reaching out with your voice and you're hoping that someone else meets that in a harmony way, that's a real moment of trust. And what you're describing of the lactation circle, that's another kind of moment of trust where, you're reaching out with just voicing something and saying, I don't know if this is right. And someone else says, you're not alone and you're doing fine and your body's doing what it needs to do, even if it feels weird, and you're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So much of our life right now is isolation and not having access to just that simple affirmation that you're going to be okay. And if I may, when I was singing that song, Love to the Loveless shown that they might lovely be, I was getting an affirmation from somewhere else through history, but also through circumstance, telling me, you feel like an absolute hot mess right now, but I've got you, you're okay. But there's another piece of that. If we want to keep talking about music, let's go from high church to just kind of pop culture. There was a band from my youth named Cheap Trick, which I loved very much. And they have a song called Surrender. And at the end of that song, the chorus of that song is pretty famous. They say, your mom's all right, your dad's all right. They just seem a little weird. Surrender, surrender, but don't give yourself away. But then at the end of the song, they start sort of singing that again and again, almost like a chant. Your mom's all right, your dad's all right. They just seem a little weird. And then they just start singing, mom's all right, dad's all right. And then they start saying the names of the band. Tommy's all right, Bunny's all right, Rick's all right. And then they start saying, we're all right. We're all right. And every time that I get to that point in the song, I burst into tears because for me, even though this is a stupid 2-minute, pop song from the 70s, there's something transcendent in hearing somebody shouting at you, you're weird, but you're all right. You're weird, but you're all right. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, it reminds me too of like a ton of like deeply moving moments, but probably one that listeners are familiar with is that scene in Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams' character he's the therapist in the situation, and the errant, brilliant young man is played by Matt Damon. And Robin Williams needs to say to him over and over, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. And the context is not totally all there for everyone watching this scene. You don't know what exactly has made Matt Damon's character kind of hardened and rough and closed off. But when he first hears Robin Williams say, "It's not your fault," he kind of brushes it off. And I think all of us do. We have this kind of like, this is a bounce off. And whatever you say is going to bounce off. I'm going to reject, whatever you say, because that might, approach vulnerability on my part. And I don't know how safe I am being vulnerable with you. But Robin Williams' character says it again and again and again. And it becomes like a chant, like a mantra. Yeah. And finally, his character just, the brilliance of his acting and everything, but in this relatable moment, like he needed to hear it 100 times before he could let himself really hear it. And that's something that I think music does for us too. Like in the song that you mentioned, in so many of these like chants that we're familiar with in our religious circles, but also like what we're crying out for, I think, in the context of our nation's response to civil unrest and injustice is like, we need this chant mantra for us to hang on to and do it again and again until we actually hear it and believe it and let our whatever walls need to come down so we can understand what that might mean for us.
Yeah. And so now you have me thinking in lots of different directions with regard to music and musical references. So I'm thinking right now, as you make the pivot to our political situation, there's a rapper by the name of DMX, and you can listen to a DMX album, and on one track, it is the most vile, violent, revenge-filled, just, I'm going to tear through all of you sort of message. And then you go a couple of tracks later, and it's almost like a prayer, and he's shouting out from the depths, "Lord, give me a sign. I can't walk unless you walk with me." And what is interesting to me is that, music in that particular artist's repertoire is giving us the entire gamut of the human condition. When I listen to DMX, it's like reading the Psalms from cover to cover, because suddenly it's like, oh, this isn't all just praise. There's a lot of really dark stuff in here too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you have this, what do I call it? You have this conversion experience almost through this song at your college. What is the journey that led you to call yourself a Catholic?
So I first began my journey of faith from atheism to theism. And, I think God set all this up pretty well around the same time that I was having this experience singing and having this message of love to the loveless shown given to me. I was working at the bookstore on campus, and it was around the time of my birthday, and we got a shipment in, and there was a book that came in that just had a really intriguing title. It was by an author I'd never heard of by the name of Milton Mayer, and the name of the book was Biodegradable Man. And for some reason, I decided I was going to buy myself that book for my birthday. And it turned out that this was a book of essays. He was a pretty progressive lefty author from the 1960s. He was involved in the peace movement, and he was involved in the movement to abolish nuclear weapons and all of that. And so I'm reading all these lefty essays, and I'm like, yeah, because my politics were sort of there at the time. But in the middle of this book of essays, there's one called Sit Down and Shut Up, which is about his first experience with the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers. And in this short essay, he talks about the fact that they took Jesus so seriously that they wouldn't fight wars. And they took Jesus so seriously that they treated everyone equally, no matter their skin color or their gender. And I said to the bookstore manager a few days later, I said, wow, I really was impressed by what I learned about the Quakers. I had never heard of them before. And that bookstore manager, some listeners may know his name. He's still a friend of mine, and he's now a very well-respected author of books on mysticism by the name of Carl McColman. But what he said at the time was, oh, well, the Quakers still exist. And in fact, there's a small Quaker meeting that meets every Sunday, here on campus. And so I got started going to the Quakers, and I was a Quaker for 15 years. And from Swanee down to Atlanta, Georgia, I was part of the Atlanta Friends meeting. And one of the things that is true of Southern Quakers is that many of them are refugees from more fundamentalist faiths. And so after a long period of time, I realized that I was feeling very hungry to talk about Jesus, but every time I would talk about Jesus with my fellow Quakers, there was some friction. They didn't like it. And so I started praying that I would find a community that would allow me to talk about, Jesus a little bit more than I was. And through a weird set of circumstances, a way opened for me to possibly begin working with a youth group at a little Presbyterian church, which was in the same neighborhood as the Quaker meeting that I went to. And so I did the good Quaker thing, and I went to my meeting, and I asked them to do what's called a clearness with me, where they sat with me and they sort of helped me discern whether or not this was a genuine call of ministry. And at the end of this process, they wrote me a letter to the Presbyterian Church, and they said, we have worked with David and we have reasoned with him, and we fully affirm his ministry, and we release him to be a traveling minister, because Quakers don't have an ordained clergy. So I basically became a very limited minister with a very limited mandate to work with these kids at this church. And I'm working for a couple of years with this church, and then I look across the street one day and I realize that across the street, Columbia Presbyterian Church is right across the street from Columbia Theological Seminary. And I come to understand that Columbia Theological Seminary is the home of several really wonderful scholars, including a man by the name of Walter Brueggemann. And I have the memory of working at the bookstore at Swanee, which was a theological bookstore as well as a campus bookstore, because we had the School of Theology there, and putting up this book that had just come out years earlier when this one particular scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann was starting to get hot. I had been shelving The Prophetic Imagination, and I was like, well, I know that
Oh
name.
my gosh.
And so I had the chance to work with Walter Brueggemann at this Presbyterian seminary. And I went to the Presbyterian seminary again with the support of my meeting. They did another clearness with me. And at the seminary, my nickname was Oates, for Quaker Oates. And I stayed a Quaker all the time that I was there. And I stayed a Quaker after I left the seminary and went to do further graduate school. But it was about 3 years into my graduate studies, and I had been working with a really wonderful professor by the name of Patu Burns, and we had been reading a lot of the early church, and he had been a Jesuit and now had been released from his priestly vows and was a professor and all of that. And he and several Catholics just really had a very strong impact on me, and I found that I was being pulled more and more towards Jesus in a much more particular way. And so the way that I talk about it now, because, online, a lot of times our fellow Catholics will get mad at me with the way that I am a Catholic, because I tend sometimes to speak up about the gospel in a way that is not in line with certain interpretations. And I just have to shrug and I say what servant of God, Sister Thea Bowman, said, and I was invited by Jesus to be here. And the other way that I can put it, I mentioned a few minutes ago the friend from college, Julia, who opened up the Bible and never hit me with it, but instead kind of showed me. And one of the many gifts that Julia gave me was one day I was asleep in my dorm room and she had snuck it into the dorm and she roused me awake, and it was like 4 a.m. and she said, I need you to put on your clothes and come with me. And she drove for an hour out to this wilderness area, and we sat on this big stone outcropping and we just watched the sunrise together. She was like, this is beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
This is beautiful, and you need to see it. Well, I feel oftentimes in the spirit of Sister Thea Bowman that Jesus kind of said in regard to the Catholic Church, hey, come here. This is beautiful and you need to see it, and I'll sit next to you while you do it. And to me, that's why I'm here. And I'm not here to be a Christian or to be a Catholic or to do anything else other than just sit with Jesus. And if people like what I do and they want to call me a Jesus follower or they want to call me a Christian, that's a good thing. But I'm not going to claim that as some sort of prize that I have. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And it's beautiful.
Thank you.
That is a beautiful, people ask me all the time, especially if they perceive that I am also a feminist or a progressive or, something else. People say, but what, that Catholic thing? And I get it. And I'm sad that those types of things, like advocating for marginalized communities and Catholic, would appear to anyone to be at odds with one another. But I don't want to not tell the truth about also the ways that our church and other faith communities have been showing up
Oh,
in the
yeah.
world, and for better, for worse. But I love that you can, with such eloquence, say, I was invited by Jesus to be here. Something beautiful is happening here, and I'm going to sit with Jesus and watch and be a part of it. That's such a great answer.
Well, thank you. I mean, the flip side of that coin is, you know, people have been telling me my entire life that I'm doing everything wrong. Like, this is not a new experience for me. And when I was an atheist, people were telling me that I was living wrong because I was an atheist. And then when I became a believer, certain mainline Protestants and maybe some Catholics would look at the Quakers much like they would look at the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons, and they would say, this is not the right way to do this. You're an outsider. Well, I'm used to that. But then, when I was at the Presbyterian seminary, I was the weirdo at the Presbyterian seminary who didn't take communion and was not going to ever be an ordained preacher. And then, so now when I'm a Catholic and people are telling me that I'm doing Catholicism wrong, I'm just at home. I've been wrong all the time. I've been an outsider all the time. I'm the Loveless, and Jesus is showing love to me, and I'm just going to keep showing up for that.
One thing that you do, because I follow you on social media platforms, and one thing that you are very consistent about is your ability or willingness to engage with people, especially people who disagree with you. And I admit I don't do that. And I don't know that I'm proud that I don't do that. Some of it is just, we were talking before we began a little bit about rejection fatigue, or just not thinking that's, a productive forum to do it, but then also feeling like guilty for not engaging. I struggle with the whole thing, but I see you very consistently engaging with people. And maybe you have, like, what is your philosophy kind of behind that? Or is it a personality quality of yours that you kind of you're showing up with that quality as well?
Well, first of all, it's very kind of you to say, and God help you for following me on social media, because it is kind of a wasteland there. But I will say that my engagement that you have observed is an evolving thing. And I've written a bit about this and published a bit about this. And I would say if you had asked me, 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, particularly with regard to Facebook, I was trying to be very irenic in that way, and I was trying to engage across the aisles. That has shifted in some ways, and I am not as open to that as I had been. I should say that because of my background, because of the kind of household I grew up in, because of the circumstances that were formative for me, I am by nature not a very nice person. And because I'm not a very nice person, I work hard every day to be a kind person. And I see those as being sort of different things.
Yeah, say more about that. You don't think you're a nice person? For everybody who's listening, I made a face when he said that.
Well, and thank you for that. My initial reflex is belligerence, and my initial sort of posture is vengeful. I am very aware that, particularly when I was younger, I was the villain in a lot of people's stories. I'm not saying that with any kind of, glory or badge of honor. I'm just saying that that's a brute fact about my life. And I was, I think of something that a friend of mine, Tyler Wigg Stevenson, once said years ago. He said, I work every day to practice patience and kindness and humility so that when I am an old man, I may embody those things. And that made an impact on me. And I have been trying to practice kindness and patience and humility every day. Yeah. And some days are better than others. And I will say to you and to your listeners, the calm and the engagement that you see on social media is the result of a lot of prayer and a lot of discernment. I'm lucky or unlucky enough to have been one of the first people to have gotten a Facebook account, just by weird circumstance, and so I have, again, made just about every mistake that a person can make online. And I have lost friendships, and I have intentionally ended friendships over some of these interactions. And I also have recognized that, there are some friendships that were worth keeping, and I didn't do as good a job of keeping them. So I think a lot about the people on the other side. And my friend David Dark has a phrase. He says, I hold open the door, and that's sometimes all that we can do. And so a lot of what I do online is just trying to hold open a door, but I also try and name and speak truth to the violence that I see. And I try not to let people have places that they can scurry away from accountability. So those are all, I don't know if that begins to answer your question, but I think an awful lot about how I am on social media. And I'm glad that your perception of me is that I am a decent person. I try to be, but there's a lot of work that goes into that.
If only more of us had that level of humility. And when you're describing what your definition is of not being not a nice person, I'm like, oh, that's me. I respond.
Yeah.
I respond too with anger. I think one thing you learn as you come to adulthood, and maybe there's a unique way that you come to be an adult woman, is how much of that is like a repressed rage.
Oh my gosh. I can only imagine.
Whether just from your own life's experiences or from the generational traumas that have been passed down that maybe have a unique way to be unpacked in this current time and place. Yeah.
May I ask you a question to follow on with that? Because we've been talking about music, and we talk about the kind of balm that music can be. But one of the things that was really useful for me when I was a rock and roller was singing Rage. And I wonder, Kate Williams, do you ever sing Rage? And what is that like for you?
Yeah. My answer is I try to.
Oh, wow.
And it never stays rage. I have some songs that I've written that are clearly rage songs, but the act of singing them makes me either weep or deliriously joyful.
I love that. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Well, I'm thinking, specifically there's this song, it's a Hannah Brown text called God Bless Our No. And it speaks to me as a young Catholic woman. I'm not young anymore. I'm going to be 40 this year, David, my God. Because, I've had a lifelong encounter with various institutions and people telling me to mimic Mary's yes, and therefore say yes to everything. And maybe my not nice instinct kind of bolsters my impulse to say, well, no. First of all, I'm not going to say yes because you tell me to. And second of all, because that's not the totality of what Mary did. Mary said yes to this thing from God, and she said no to the 1,000 other avenues or, lanes that her life could have traveled in.
God bless our no when we call out cruel prejudice and hate. God bless our protest when we shout or reason in debate. God bless our bodies here to stay despite how they offend. God bless our strength to make a way, resist, oppose, contend. God bless our no when we reject unwelcome talk or touch. God bless our claim for more respect when others take too much. God bless our boundaries firm and clear, disputed or displaced. God bless our anger and our fear. No one should be erased. God bless our no when we expose the loathsome lies we learn. God bless our change as wisdom grows, as thoughts and actions
She said yes to that one thing, but she said no to the types of abuse that either the society or empire, or she said no. She said she resisted a heck of a lot of social norms for her time. So Hannah Brown writes this text, and she writes it in, for me, a current context of wanting to empower people, especially women, to know that saying no is also holy. And you
Amen.
have the agency and responsibility to know what is right for you and what's not right for you. That's a holy dialogue between you and God, and you should do everything in your power to claim that and step into that truth for yourself. And Hannah Brown says it so eloquently in her text, God bless her, no. And I wrote with rage when I wrote a tune for those words, because I was bringing with me the ire of the 1,000 generations before me. And now when I sing it, I cannot not smile, because it feels like, I might cry in this moment too. Wow, it's all coming out at once. It feels like, what is the word? Maybe it's beyond language. It feels holy. It feels like I'm doing and saying something that God has asked me to do and say. And so I can say it with the confidence of being held by the things and the persons, the Trinity, the thing that matters. And I feel strong. I feel strong enough to face that resistance that will come from saying no. Yeah, that's what I think about singing Rage, is that I sing it, I start there and I never finish with Rage.
I'm so grateful for all of that, and so grateful that you've had that experience, and so grateful that you trusted me to share that with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to pivot to, you have a new publication called The Accessorized Bible. Tell us what the heck that is.
Well, it is a new book it is a new book to the world. It is an old book to me. And the way that this sort of came together, you may recall, and your listeners may recall, that probably, between 20 years ago and 15 years ago, we used to have big bookstores like Borders and Barnes and Noble. And there were Bible publishers, in particular Bible publishers like Thomas Nelson, and they wanted to capitalize on all of these eyeballs by making what my friend Timothy Beale calls a kind of disaster crop of Bibles, where just like every shape and size of Bible you could imagine, and every identity of Bible that you could imagine sort of came onto the market. So there were, in addition to being women's Bibles and various types of study Bibles, there were firemen's Bibles and there were policemen's Bibles, but there were also golfers' Bibles and teen Bibles that looked like, Rolling Stone magazine and everything like this. And so initially, when I first got the contract with Yale to do Accessorized Bible, we all thought that it was going to be a kind of examination of these wild forests of Bibles and all of the weirdnesses. And as I continued to write the book, and as I continued to sit with the book, a different project emerged. And the moment, of examining these wild forests of Bibles, it sort of passed, because first of all, the big box bookstores went away. And so you couldn't just go down to the Borders and suddenly see the crazy variety that I had seen. And so it became less relevant in that sense, but also the publishing industry changed radically and a lot of things sort of shifted. But what didn't change was the fact that as we use our Bibles, we use them in some ways to guide us in terms of our behavior with one another, but also we use them to cover for our behavior for one another. Well, I did this because the Bible commanded me to. I shut the door in this person's face. I made sure that this person couldn't go to the bathroom in peace. I made sure that these particular people who have the wrong set of papers can't live in peace in our community. I did that because the Bible tells me to. And so I began to think of, because we had started this topic, the accessorized Bible, back when it was the Bible that was accessorizing to all these different lifestyles and everything. But I began to think less of it like that, although it's still in there a little bit. But I also began to think of what it means to be an accessory to a crime. And where the Bible stands, where the Bible stands when we do violence to one another, what is its role? Is it stopping us from doing that violence, or is it kind of whispering in our ear saying, yeah, God hates this one. Go get this one. And so I wrestled with that, and I'm so grateful to the editors at Yale as they realized that a different project was emerging. They didn't pull the plug, but they gave me a lot of runway to get the plane off the ground. And I rewrote the book 4 times. And so this is why I say it's a new book to the world, but it's an old book to me. And there are earlier versions of the book that say different things and have different focuses, but I'm really glad that this is the one that emerged, because I say early on in the book, it's really not a book about Bibles. It's a book about us and what we do with one another and how we treat one another and how we use the Bible to encourage either the best in us or the worst in us. And it's really trying to slow down, again, my friend David Dark would say, to slow the tape and to try and get us to notice when we make those choices. And so that's not a succinct answer, and I'm sorry about that. But in terms of what it is, it's a book about how we read, the ethics of how we read, and how we treat each other as we're reading this object that we call the Bible.
Yeah, you were kind enough to share a review draft with me, which I'm still working on. But this sounds like something we desperately need in current context. I was lamenting with my staff earlier that I'm really growing impatient showing up for Mass every Sunday and not hearing about the current state of things. It's not that I'm asking for my church services to become politicized. It's not that, but I want to hear a word about how to show up as a Catholic, as a person who believes in Jesus, as a person who wants to do good in the world. I want to hear a word about how I can be present to this moment, how I can contribute to, hopefully something more just than the way that things are. And it has just been ignored for, since we need to find a stopping point, I have not yet in 2026 heard anything in my church about how to be a faithful Catholic American citizen in this moment.
May I speak to that a little bit?
Please do.
Well, so you are talking about the homiletic side, the willingness of your church leadership to speak from the pulpit about these issues, but it goes more deeply than that. The common lectionary, as you probably are aware, has been carefully curated to expunge all of the lament, all of the naming of violence. And in fact, sometimes you will have readings in the daily office or in the stuff that people hear on Sundays, and there will be, for example, a psalm that will name something tragic or something horrible, and the psalm will literally read up to that point, and then there'll be a ... and then it will continue. And so
there like 137, right? Because 137
my gosh.
ends.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, it ends with the bashing of little infants' heads on the rocks.
Yeah.
And people probably don't recall that.
Yeah.
We don't hear it.
Yeah. And so it's structural. It's not just intentional. It's not just that the church leadership has been trained not to speak to the moments. Although my wife, who used to work for U.S. Catholic Magazine, used to lament that anytime there was anything about abortion in the news, she could expect within the hour to get a fax from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, speaking about that. Any other issue, she would say, it's crickets. And so there is a real kind of allergy to bringing this in, and our pastoral leadership is trained to be allergic to that. Unless you have, someone like the Berrigan brothers, or here in Chicago, someone like Pastor Flager, who are willing to step into the fray. But for the most part, the intention is sort of trained out of our leadership, but also the structure isn't there to support the language, even if they had the intention, because people will say, well, why are you bringing this call about violence or this call about politics into the church. This is a place where we're supposed to look at, godly things, because they haven't been shown the godly things that tell them about how invested God is with the poor, how invested God is with the vulnerable. But just the fact that we don't have the structure for the language of that, I think someone made that choice a long time ago, and we are reaping the disastrous crop of that to this day.
Yeah. I mean, liturgically, I have probably too much time to think about this kind of a thing, but like liturgically, as Catholics, we understand that the Mass is a sacrifice. How do you divorce violence from sacrifice so smoothly? Like, do we forget what the word sacrifice means? Do we forget that who it was who sacrificed? And I don't want to, I'm not ending on a Good Friday. I know that we've got an Easter, that's the real joy that we celebrate, but it seems so.
Yeah.
I feel robbed of the total experience of human emotion, human reality, and the real life experience of this guy named Jesus, who we understand to be fully human and fully divine.
Well, let me take a moment and make it worse.
Oh, cool.
Okay, I'm kidding, but maybe not. We'll see. I was very struck. I have an acquaintance who is a member of the Sikh faith, Sikh. And for those that are unfamiliar, these are the people that are oftentimes mistaken for Muslims, but they wear a very distinct head covering. And I don't recall the technical name for it, but we in the West, we would call it a turban. And they wear their beards long, all that. And in a conversation at one point, the question of his turban came up. And it was not just me and him talking. There were several of us talking in a sort of loose group. And there was a question about it because, we were outsiders to his faith. We didn't know what's the deal with the turban. His answer has stayed with me to this day, and I don't know if his answer is generalizable to all Sikhs or whether it is just something that he thought about, but it really made an impact on me. He says, I wear this because when I am in public, I want people to know that if they are in danger, they can run to me and they will be protected.
Mm.
And I have been thinking about our cross, and in Catholicism, our crucifix, which is literally a symbol of somebody being tortured to death by the state.
Mm-hmm.
And we have managed somehow to make the cross not a symbol of protection against the violence of the state, a protection against the violence of bigotry, a protection against the kind of exclusionary hatred that put Jesus to death. And instead, we've managed to erase all of those aspects, and now we make it a kind of identity marker, a kind of brand symbol that says if you wear this and you look the right way, you're in, and if you wear this and you look the wrong way, then you get nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I am heartbroken that I can see a cross and I don't know whether it means that safety is behind it. And think about, I grew up in the Deep South where, the Ku Klux Klan used to burn crosses just to terrify people. But, forget burning crosses. The people that sat across from me in elementary school or followed me into the bathroom to harangue me, they were wearing crosses around their necks oftentimes, or they were claiming the name of Jesus, and they were trying to terrorize me. And they were trying to say that I didn't belong and that there was no place in the world or the cosmos or eternity for me. And that's what we have done with this symbol, and that's what we oftentimes do with our liturgies. And to me, I'm going to kind of name it, that to me, that is, for want of a better word, that is a kind of antichrist. And yet, I can't say it's not legitimate because I look around me and, most of the people that are my co-religionists are doing it. I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox now. I will step back down.
No, this is, I don't think it's a soapbox. I think it's just us trying to live in the year 2026 with eyes and ears and trying to understand. And I don't know, we're talking, for context, we are talking 2 days after another American citizen was killed in the streets in Minneapolis. And I think still, 2 days later, I have not yet processed what I have seen.
Yeah.
Now 50 times as I've scrolled through my news and social media feeds. I know, like so many people have said, we're not made to see this kind of stuff. Like our brains have not caught up, our evolution has not caught up with being able to see this kind of violence over and over again. I cannot watch that man be killed again
Yeah.
because I've now seen it at least 50 times. Not only can I not process what I'm seeing, but then on top, like, what do I do with that information? I now have this information that now lives in my brain, in my body. And what do I do with that information? I would like to know what, collectively, what we think is a Christian response for what to do with that information. Like, I don't mean to, I know I don't want to just make everything sound like a political argument. That's not what it is. I'm talking about an embodied reality. I don't know what to do with what I am seeing, and I'm grasping for the places to hold my hand while I figure it out. Scripture maybe being one of them, Christian community being one of them, music being one of them. I don't even know. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say other than we're just processing this together.
Yeah. Well,
What else can you do?
Well, and I have kind of two immediate thoughts about what you're raising here. And the first is when Pope Francis named the church as a field hospital. That's a metaphor that I really appreciate. And the thing about a field hospital is it's not a cathedral. It's not a permanent building. It's something temporary that you literally put up in the midst of a war zone. And you are aware that at any time, either the wind or the bombs could wipe you away. But your job is to be open to all the wounded. And I mean, we are becoming aware of what our African-American brothers and sisters and our Latino brothers and sisters and non-binary persons have known for many generations in this country, and certainly, indigenous communities as well, that there is no safety, and that any word that you have that you will be protected can be rescinded at any moment if you become inconvenient for the state. Well, it is now our job, now that our white eyes have been opened to that, to continue to man the field hospital and to not run screaming and say, oh, this is so terrible, but to say, wow, now we are in solidarity with so many more people. And in the midst of that solidarity, we can make a difference, small though it may be. St. Therese said, don't try and do grand things, but do little things with great love. And so to be in our little corner with great love, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle here, even as things feel very overwhelming. The second thought that I have is the same day that I got the news, this past Saturday, I had scheduled a trip over to the Museum of Contemporary Art, where there's an exhibition honoring my favorite of the Beatles, Yoko Ono. And in the midst of this exhibition, there's this room where there are these tables. And on these tables, there are all these smashed pieces of pottery, teapots and whatever. And the whole point of that room is, as long as you like, however you like, sit down at a table and mend these back together. And you can either mend them back to try and put them the way that they were, or you can put them into a new shape. You can use twine, you can use glue, you can use other sorts of things, but make something beautiful out of the rubble. And then there are shelves along the walls where what you make gets displayed as if it is art, just like all the rest of the art in the museum. And I really like the idea that out of the rubble, out of the broken stuff, we still have the ability to make something beautiful, and that someone else can see that beauty and be moved by it and realize that there is hope even when there has been destruction. I stood in that room and I wept. I'll just tell you.
I want to cry right now. We're talking about it.
Because really, the fact that there is that possibility, and that someone who has seen violence and who has experienced violence could still decide that art is useful in that way and hopeful in that way, and that there could be a yes instead of a no, that to me, I needed that message, and I'm glad to share that message with you, because it sounded like you needed it too.
Absolutely. It's reminding me of a lot of the reasons why I can be so easily coaxed back into the world of art and faith. I experienced it again. I watched a documentary series going to forget the title of it, but the series is about what is known as the Beatrice Six, the Beatrice in Beatrice, Nebraska. It's like a true crime thing. So it's like an investigation of this elderly woman who was found murdered in her home. And there was a sequence of events. I'm going to say this is like in the 70s or 80s, but a sequence of events that led to these 6 young people being arrested and incarcerated. A couple of them, their sentences were like 50 years for being involved in this incident. Fast forward to, DNA analysis becoming more available and readily used. Later DNA analysis showed that the 6 people who had been, accused and incarcerated of this crime were excluded from the possible candidates of being there.
Wow.
This tiny little town of Beatrice was completely divided over what they thought happened. The family of the woman were, most of them absolutely 100% convicted that it was these 6 people, and they were now being unfairly, they must have known something. They were a part of it in some way, so they shouldn't be released from prison. And then the family, friends, and supporters of the 6 people who always knew and believed of their innocence and now lamenting, the loss of decades of life outside the bars of incarceration. This community still, it didn't matter the evidence. It didn't matter, the stories of the people who were involved. It did not matter. They were so convinced. And the documentarians, this is where art comes in. The documentarians had this idea, we're only going to use transcripts from recorded testimony of the time, but they fashioned it into a play.
Oh, wow.
And they auditioned and, assigned roles to basically act out these series of testimonies and court hearings from members of the local community. And they invited the community to come and see this play, including the descendants of this woman who had been so convinced that these 6 people were involved. And they simply put on a play. They simply used the reality of what happened, but fashioned it into a piece of art known as a play. And they invited the community to come and see, just experience it all together in the same place, hear the same thing at the same time. And the incredible reconciliation that came out of, they also invited law enforcement because they didn't know if people were going to get into, fist fights and threats being hurled just by having this wound reopened again. But instead, quite the opposite happened, is that hearing it and experiencing it, okay, it's art, but it's real life. It's experiencing it together. Just the facts and not all of the conjecture and the pressure and the feeling, just experiencing the facts in one place at one time actually did have some kind of power to open people up for reconciliation, for seeing things in another way, for recognizing the humanity in one another. And I thought, oh my God, if we didn't have art as a place where we can reimagine the possibilities for how to heal and how to move forward. That's the gift of art. That's why I love art. That's why I love making music, is because it's not about creating something beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, but it's because of that thing that it's doing in the undercurrents, that thing that I don't have language for, I don't have an explanation for, but it provides, maybe it takes down the wall of that we put up so that, because we're afraid of vulnerability. Maybe it's the walls of stigma or stereotype or, whatever, but it gives you a chance to come at a situation just like a clean slate.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I think you understand what I mean.
I really do. And I'm very moved by this mental image that I now have of this moment where even the filmmakers didn't know what was going to happen. Like anything could have happened in that moment. And it sounds like the best possible outcome could have happened, but there was no net. Like they couldn't guarantee that. And that really speaks to me, when you make a piece of music, there's a certain type of control and there's a certain type of release, because you also have to be willing to let that piece of art go into unfamiliar situations and be used in unfamiliar ways, and you don't know how it's going to be received. And so there's a real act of trust as you are doing this work editorially to bring something into the world. And you say that you're not so concerned whether it is aesthetically pretty or beautiful or whatever. And I hear that. And I also think that there is a kind of beauty in the connection, that even when something is dissonant, it can create a connection, or it can create a feeling that transcends its surface beauty or non-beauty. And at this point, I don't know what I'm saying other than just to kind of riff on what you're saying.
No, you're saying exactly what your experience was in the art museum. You're saying, here's a mess of broken things made into new, beautiful things that, it's not like, it's not like everything happens for a reason. So these things were broken so that something beautiful could be made from them. It's not that.
No.
It's just taking the messiness of life and deciding that there is still something beautiful in here. And with that, like, co-creation, with that willingness to engage and imagine that it's actually true.
Yeah.
It's actually true. There really is something beautiful here. There's something that can bring a grown man to tears just by walking in the room and witnessing. Gosh, that's beautiful. I didn't ask you the return question, though. Do you sing Rage?
Yeah. So growing up, I first of all borrowed Rage from other artists. So there was a band I really liked when I was in high school called Husker Du. And they came from, ironically enough, from the Minneapolis area. But they managed to take anger and rage and make it beautiful. But they didn't dull the scream even as they made it beautiful. And so, really angular guitars and really distorted music, and oftentimes, singing in an almost inarticulate, almost scream-like quality. And I would drive around late in the evening with the windows down, and I would scream along with them. And then when I, got older and I was in rock bands myself, started out sort of covering Husker Du songs, and then also learning to write my own songs. Some of my songs, used really loud angular guitars and incorporated, screaming and all that, just because I didn't know how else to get it out. But in the process of that, I discovered something else, and that is that a quiet song can be even more therapeutic and devastating and impactful than a song that just kind of lays it out there. And so I also learned how to take the heartbreak that I was feeling and make something delicate out of the heartbreak, and to be able then to have that artifact, that piece of music, later not be in a vengeful way, but in a communicative way, to be able to say to the person who had broken my heart, if you want to understand part of what I'm enduring right now, this is a piece of it. That's really an important piece of all this. Is, starting with Rage, I learned how to be quiet. But just because I was quiet, that didn't mean that I was less angry. But in the process of learning to be quiet and angry, I also eventually learned to be less angry. But none of this was like a magic process, and none of it was, getting less angry was not the goal. Just being able to, well, let me take two steps back. I've mentioned to you, a couple of times in our acquaintance and friendship with one another, and also in this conversation, I'm neurodivergent. I'm on the spectrum and all that. And so, like many people who are neurodivergent, I have a sort of situation going on called alexithymia, which means that for most of my life, I had an inability to put words to my emotions. And so one of the things that music did was it helped me to communicate emotions when I had no words for them. But I could play loud, or I could, and Mr. Rogers says you bang the piano when you're mad or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was a way of connecting even when I didn't have the words to connect. And as I have gotten older, thank goodness, thank God, I have learned the words to connect, and I can speak about my interior life a lot more readily than I used to be able to. So that's a long answer to your question. Yes, I still sing rage because there's still so much to be enraged about, but
Yeah.
I'm no longer gripped by rage in the way that I was.
Yeah. You're reminding me as you're, recounting your own experience just of that reality that's kind of like it's a return to our most true selves. I'm just thinking about little babies and they don't have language, but they have screams
Yes.
and they have cries. They come out crying, they don't need the language. We learn that later, I think, to be more palatable with one another. And yeah, for clarity, I think. But babies they don't need language to let you know that there is something that they are in need of. And mostly it's attention. It's food, it's comfort. It's, hey, I'm here. And I demand that you not leave me alone.
I really like that you went there. And part of learning to be more hospitable is learning to be available to the interruption.
Yeah.
And I remember how much I'm going to own it right now, how much I used to hate hearing babies. When I was single and when I was in my own anger that was undealt with, and I would go into just like, and I would be so uncharitable. And then I had kids of my own.
Yeah.
And you can't survive in that state of being uncharitable to your kids because it'll do bad things to your soul. And so I had to learn real fast, real hard, how to be hospitable to those cries. And I am so glad.
Yeah. There's something, I don't know if this is true for everyone. I don't know if it's being in a cis female body, but when my daughter would scream or cry, it was hard for me to communicate just how real the physical pain of that was.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was like, I don't know, I still don't even have the words for it, but it was like my heart squeezed like this. I was having a physical reaction to the sound that I was hearing. And I think maybe that's, to be overly romanticized about it, but that is a reaction of love.
Yeah.
Is that I'm hearing something that I can do something about. I can pay attention. And I feel responsible to do that. And I think maybe some of my inadequacy in this moment is like I'm feeling the cry of our world.
Yeah.
And it's squeezing me in a way that I don't know what to do about it yet, but I'm paying attention. And maybe that is just like the first step in helping me figure out what to do next, helping all of us figure out what to do next. But let's name the pain of that and hope that the instruction for what to come next will indeed arrive soon.
I think of that poem. I believe it was Mary Oliver, but I can't be sure. But she's running her fingers along a map and she asks, where does it hurt? And the map answers everywhere. And it's just, that's what we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. David, there are so many more things that we could talk about, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to tell people where to find you to learn more about your work in this world.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say how grateful I am for the chance to have this conversation with you. It is just a delight. And we've gone into some heavy subjects, but wow, I have felt cherished in every single second of it. And I'm just so grateful to you, Kate.
Glad.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Of course. For folks that want to find me on social media, if you plug in the words Dault Radio, you'll find me just about everywhere. And then if you want to find something a little less acerbic and contentious, please just search for my name, David Dault, particularly if you go to daviddault.com, or if you go to Substack and you put in my name, you'll come to a blog called David Dault is Writing Things. And so basically just try and track down my name, and I'm so terminally online that it's very hard to miss me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, David, will you, in our shared tradition, would you pray with me before we say goodbye today? In the name of the Father and the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. God, thank you. Thank you for bringing us together today. for introducing us into one another's lives, and for the gift that it is to name the rage, the joy, the brokenness, the beauty all around us. Thank you. And God, please help us to know what to do with what you have given us. Help us to know where to show up, where to listen, who to sit beside, how to express our deepest rage, and how to find comfort in your silence. No matter what, help us to know how we can be present to one another and to you, that your will may be done. We ask this through our brother Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
David, one more time, thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for this lovely conversation. Honestly, I wish we could do it every day. I could talk to you forever.
That's very kind, and likewise. Thank you, Kate. It's been a joy to be with you.
Thank you. So there you have it. This is another exchange of ideas and experiences and hope-filled embrace of all that has been and all that might be as we continue singing our lives back to God.